Everything's falling into place at last. It's Tetris, the legal version, on NES Works episode 153.
Listen to your heart. There's nothing else you can do.
At the end of the last episode, I teased Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But it's to be an unrequited romance for the moment, because now, the wintertime, 'tis the season for Tetris. And that's not just because of the Tchaikovsky music. I mean, yes, Sugar Plum Fairies and all that, but more crucially, Tetris is what I think of as Nintendo's first real holiday release. This is entirely a subjective thing, of course, but Tetris really does seem like the first time that Nintendo had enough of a handle on its console business in the US to sit back and say, alright, let's give the kids a banger to find under the tree. This would become more of a capital T thing in the 1990s, perhaps most memorably with Donkey Kong Country in 1994 and Ocarina of Time in 1998. But the concept of releasing a tentpole title in the US just in time for the holiday shipping season really began to solidify here in 1989, as Nintendo published its version of one of the most compelling and addicting video games of all time. Well, one of its versions. And maybe not the best version. Actually, arguably the least best. They say that the third time's a charm, but I don't know that that's true in this case. The third release of Tetris for a Nintendo system in America in 1989. And by far, the least charming. Although I suppose it depends on what you mean by charming. I won't deny that it's the best looking of all the Tetrises to date. Tetris, whatever. Nintendo's internal teams converted this one, it appears, and they gave it a loving facelift that turns the Tetrominos into bright, candy-colored objects with shiny highlights and a sense of three-dimensionality. Every individual shape demonstrates its own color scheme, which cycles based on the current speed level. And overall, it just looks gorgeous. It sounds great too, with strong chiptune renditions of the music heard on Game Boy and none of that system's trademark audio hiss. And that's about the good of it. That's being reductive. Of course it's good on some level, it's Tetris. As always, Tetris consists of a large well, usually empty, though sometimes cluttered with junk, into which arrangements of block perpetually fall one at a time. As soon as one block lands, another appears at the top of the screen and begins its descent. You can guide these pieces as they drop, moving them laterally, and rotating them clockwise or counterclockwise until their bottom edge touches a surface. At that point, the falling block becomes fixed and immovable, a part of the well, and the only way to remove it is to create an unbroken line of blocks across the well, which will clear away all block pieces on that horizontal row. The more lines you clear away in a single move, the more points you receive. The game's ultimate move, the eponymous Tetris, involves clearing 4 rows of blocks out of the well in a single action. That's the most you can accomplish simply because all pieces consist of 4 blocks, the tetra in Tetris. There are 7 possible configurations of 4 blocks, and all of them appear as part of the well drop, with each presenting its own unique challenges and possibilities. The long piece which connects 4 blocks end on a single axis is the key to scoring a Tetris, but can also be annoying if it shows up before you're ready. Meanwhile, the S and Z-shaped blocks are usually the ones that give you grief, although the 2x2 square piece can also be a nuisance. It's a simple setup, and it's easy enough to play, but the action picks up speed as you clear rows until you can no longer keep up with the pace. This mixture of simplicity and rising difficulty makes for a truly addicting experience, which accounts for Tetris's enduring popularity. As for this version, well, remember, Tetris operates under the same existential rule as pizza, which famously operates under the same existential rule as sex. Bad Tetris is still Tetris, which is better than no Tetris. And this game isn't even bad Tetris. Bad Tetris would be something more like Bulletproof Software's version of the game for Famicom, which made use of a genuinely miserable control scheme that raises a previously unthinkable question. Is it possible for Tetris to control so badly that you don't even want to play it? In addition to looking a lot nicer than its Famicom predecessor, NES Tetris controls a lot better, with X and Y axis controls sensibly mapped to the D-pad, and rotation wisely assigned to buttons A and B. But compared to the Tengen and Game Boy versions of Tetris, which had shipped in May and August respectively, NES Tetris feels anemic. To wit, it lacks anything resembling a 2-player mode. This version of Tetris contains only 2 game modes. The first is the classic endless Tetris, in which you start with an empty well. and the speed increases as you hit milestones of lines cleared away until you become overwhelmed and the stack of blocks filling the well hits the kill line at the top. The alternate mode gives you a well cluttered with garbage blocks that you need to work around and through in order to clear a set number of lines. Notably, it does not include a head-to-head option against another player or the CPU. This is a strictly solo experience. That may come as a surprise given the importance of competitive play to puzzle titles like this. Even more surprising is that hackers have found a fully implemented, albeit unfinished, two-player mode in this version of the game, dummied out but still accessible by dicking around with memory values, such as with a device like the Game Genie. Now, I have a hard time believing that the Atari Games arcade coders at Tengen could figure out how to get multiplayer Tetris working on Nintendo's hardware, while Nintendo's own team couldn't. What seems far more likely to me is that someone up the food chain decided to reserve competitive play as a feature exclusively for the Game Boy release, given that the head-to-head link cable play was such a key selling feature for that platform, and the pack-in Tetris cart was their marquee demonstration of the Link system. It wouldn't do to have the unique nature of that version's feature undermined by the console release, would it? Never mind that Tengen had already offered it in their unauthorized NES cart. That one was banned from sale quickly enough that hardly anyone saw it. And Nintendo pushed Tetris for NES hard. They lavished far more attention on this version of the game in the pages of Nintendo Power than they had afforded for the Game Boy release, despite the fact that the portable cart was the vanguard for an entire new platform. That's a big part of why I see this as Nintendo's first significant holiday release, the ungodly amount of promotion it received. Sure, Zelda 2 and Super Mario Bros. 2 had also received insane amounts of first-party hype in 1988, but those games were never meant to ship as late as they did. If not for the infamous chip shortage crisis, they'd have launched in the first half of the year, and their holiday timing was simply bad luck. And Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was positioned pretty tidily as a big holiday release in 1987, but it's not like the NES had much of an install base at that point. Not to mention, no promotional magazines showing up bi-monthly in kids' mailboxes. Tetris is where the Nintendo marketing machine truly kicked into high gear in synergy with game releases, with the pre-Thanksgiving cartridge release preceded by a heavy push in direct mailings. And even after the holidays had rolled into 1999, Nintendo continued to push its version of Tetris. March 1999 saw the debut of the Nintendo World Championships Tournament, where kids from all around the US competed in a wizard-style event to achieve a high score in a specially programmed cartridge that contained mini events spanning Super Mario Bros., Rad Racer, and Tetris. In fact, gaming champ Thor Åkerlund won the tournament by realizing that he could max out his scores by skipping past the first two games as quickly as possible and cranking up the bonuses in Tetris. Probably not what Nintendo intended, but the metagame counts too. Anyway, this promotional effort seems to have worked out for Nintendo. Tetris became the all-time fourth best-selling title for NES, outpacing both Zelda and Super Mario 2, with more than 8 million units sold. As a $40 cartridge, that accounts for more than 300 million in gross sales, which makes it easy to see why Nintendo went legal beast mode on Tengen about their unlicensed release. It wasn't just pettiness or protectivism, but also a naked enthusiasm for raking in obscene gobs of money. Honestly, the entire Tetris licensing saga is kind of remarkable for the simple fact that it happened at all. At the time of Tetris's initial licensing, it was an obscure creation from the opposite side of the Iron Curtain. Designed by a Soviet academic, property of a communist government that didn't even really get the entire concept of licensing to begin with. Entire processes and business entities had to be created entirely for the purpose of licensing Tetris to the West. And that ultimately turned out well, with Tetris creator Alexei Pajitnov eventually becoming the beneficiary of those structures after some fairly long and hard-fought efforts. Today, the Tetris concept is managed by a dedicated corporation, the Tetris Company, that oversees not only licensing, but also tournaments, branding, and the evolution of universal rule sets for the game. But this is video games we're talking about. It's a pure miracle that anyone went to the trouble of going through official channels that didn't even really exist, in order to acquire the publishing rights to Tetris and codify the game as a legally protected creation around the world. Look at the way everyone in the world, including Nintendo, straight up swiped Pong's design in the 1970s, including Pong publisher Atari, who very likely swiped the concept from Ralph Baer's Brown Box project at Magnavox. Look at how many brazen clones of Breakout and Space Invaders existed. including some from Nintendo. Consider the sheer number of brazen Pac-Man and Mario clones that followed those games' breakout success. And do I even need to mention the infinite cascade of blatant Xevious ripoffs that emerged from Japanese arcade houses in the mid-80s? Not on this channel, I don't. You guys were already thinking it, and that's why I love you. Even in this modern era, mobile platforms and app stores are glutted with games that rip off any great and successful idea you care to name. Even obscure failures get knocked off with shameless asset lifts and clones based around stock libraries. And what is Tetris, really? It's a simple, abstract game about things falling and vanishing. The original version was so abstract, in fact, that it ran entirely in text mode on a low-power Soviet computer. Although the specifics of the game, the 4 block pieces, the scoring system, the way pieces vanish, have since been written into intellectual property law, that didn't have to be the case. If someone from the West had discovered the game on the endless array of diskettes that circulated the Warsaw Pact computer community in the mid-80s and said, "Yoink, that's mine now," who was going to stop that person from coding their own derivative clone? If they had then made massive gobs of cash without bothering to okay it with the Soviet government, what was going to happen? I mean, maybe someone involved would have fallen mysteriously from a high window shortly after a thick-necked KGB heavy was seen in the area, but realistically, it would have been just another case of a good video game idea being stolen, cloned, spun off, and effectively turned into a concept rather than a property. So I think some credit is due early licensors like Andromeda Software's Robert Stein and BPS's Hank Rogers, who took the complicated, ethical approach and properly sorted out rights to the game. I mean, that certainly caused no end of headaches for Tengen, but it ultimately helped preserve the game's legacy and legitimacy, and that's pretty cool. Granted, it also means that NES owners got stuck with this pretty but shallow version, which unfortunately, for many people, is the definitive take on Tetris for its sheer sales volume, especially since it remains the most accessible classic version today thanks to its recent addition to Nintendo Switch Online. And that's a shame. But you take the bad, or the mediocre I suppose, with the good, right? Right. Next time on NES Works, romance certainly is the goal.